When we talk about the explosively formed penetrator, or the EFV, that is the high end of the IED experience in Iraq.
Hey, look, there is an Iranian operatives in the ground, whether you believe it or not. They're causing damage. They're collecting intelligence.
You know, clear terroristic acts and leadership from Iran, from Tehran.
And Iran came in and murdered this American soldier. And you think I should walk away and not hold Iran accountable for their act?
They would get creative, but now you had something that was guaranteed to be a killer.
If Iran were to come with lawyers to court and try to defend themselves, they would be crushed by the weight of the evidence.
Hey guys, this is Hamid Jassim, host of The Black Side Show. In this episode is actually with Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Gaudio, who participated in the Second Fallujah battle as a United States Marine Corps officer. He's also a Purple Heart recipient. He's in this episode with actually Doug Kreis, who is the head lawyer that's suing the government of Iran on the biggest counterterrorism lawsuit against the government of Iran to compensate U.S. soldiers who were injured in Iraq and Afghanistan. Through this episode, you'll hear a lot of secrets and a lot of classified information that was discovered against the government of Iran, who was involved in killing our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Make sure you like and subscribe. Enjoy the show. Deployed as a Marine, the Marines did quite a different timing for deployments. They did like 6 and 3 months, correct?
Yeah, so our typical deployment cycle was a 7-month rotation, 210-day deployment. And depending on what battalion was going to be ripping in and out with you, we certainly made every effort to keep in battle space for 210 days. But there would always be occasions where a battalion, in some instances, could get shorted a couple days, so you'd be out there for 190. But in most instances, a lot of battalions would find themselves extended for a month or two, depending on what the commander's needs were out there at the time. But generally speaking, I would say it was a 7-month, 210 deal.
What year did you go to Iraq?
I was there 2005, 2006, 2007, and my last time in Iraq was 2017 for Operation Inherent Resolve after the ISIS folks came back, and it was interesting. I really had an opportunity to see how everything changed, and it had the same feel, but it was different players, different time.
You qualified for an Iraqi citizenship at this point.
Yeah, I think I paid enough in taxes.
Right. I mean, it's crazy to see how the Marines were deployed in Iraq. I still remember from first Fallujah battle in Iraq that the Marines deployed for a short amount of time, but wasn't just any short amount of time.
Yeah.
You came straight into the chamber, straight to the heaviest fight literally in the world in Fallujah, all Anbar province, Ramadi, Rawa, Qaim, all the places literally where the Marines was just a fireball, was a fight in a certain way. Perhaps every single Marine I talked to thought they were fighting at the worst spot on earth. Or the worst spot in Anbar province.
Yeah, I'll never forget. We had a lot of news media that came out to Ramadi, not only because it was a provincial capital and everybody was interested in what the governor was doing and so forth. Yeah. But we had Arwa Damon out there. We had folks from CBS. We had all these folks come out, and all of the headlines was always Ramadi, the most dangerous city on earth. Well, I'm here to tell you it was. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that if you were out there April, May, June of 2006, you can qualify that statement with ease. That's what it was. And, prior to the time that Zarqawi was killed, certainly what are the days that are burned in my head are like April 2nd, 2006, April 10th of 2006, and then certainly the April 17th attack of 2006, where, Al-Qaeda of Iraq really came alive across the entirety of the city of Ramadi, if not all of Anbar, but we certainly felt the weight of it where I was, no doubt.
Did you ever notice that the fighting in Ramadi was completely different style than Fallujah?
Oh yeah, when you compare the differences of how the enemy behaved and the things that the enemy did, we used to make jokes about so it's going to be fighting Monday through Thursday. We're going to get together at mosque on Friday. We're going to get together. We're going to roll out the map on the floor, and we're going to figure out how we're going to get back after it again. This is just, Marines sitting around being cynical about what they think the enemy's doing. And there was a certain amount of truth to that, because like Friday morning prayer was cool. Like there'd be nothing going on.
Yeah.
And then as soon as like 13, 1400, 1500 in the afternoon rolled around, when people broke out, it just erupted into gunfire every Friday.
Yeah.
Every Friday afternoon, you knew it was going to be a gunfight.
Many people here in the United States especially didn't realize the difference about Anbar province. I mean, the population. As an Iraqi, totally. I know that the Anbar province just separates itself from the rest of Iraq. Everything, culture-wise, right. The backgrounds, the way they raise their kids, everything is different. Perhaps Al-Anbar, specifically Fallujah, is known to be more devoted place than anybody. Fallujah is known to be the city of mosques.
Yeah.
There's more religious mosques, more religious people in Fallujah, and also more former Iraqi military.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're thinking about if you think about the one person that almost assassinated Saddam Hussein was from the Anbar province.
Yeah.
Was a pilot. He was close. He almost got him. A second person tried to assassinate Saddam Hussein was also from the Anbar province. It just goes to show that they were not really known as a pro-Saddam, but they're just known to be those like shitheads that never wanted to. Fighting was just in their culture.
Yeah, it was interesting that you say that, because now when I think back to it, when we were going through the initial phases after 03, beginning of 04, getting into 05, we were still in the debathification, right? Doing debathification. And, we had forgotten some of the lessons of our own history, like when we were getting, going back to like late 45, early 46. In Germany, for instance, we had the process of denazification. Yeah. Okay. Not in all that much different, but the reality of the matter is these are still the guys that run the electric stations. These are the guys that run the sewers. These are the guys that run all of your civil services. Okay. So now you've chased all those dudes off. They're all in hiding.
Yeah.
And, the problem that we figured out real quick is it wasn't just a matter of rebuilding security there. You had to set up all these civil services at the same time. Otherwise, it didn't matter. It never mattered how much security you could provide.
Yeah.
But, by the way, the enemy is working behind with the shadow governors, and they're working with people to, thwart your efforts every step of the way. Like, okay, why do I want to be an Iraqi policeman at the government center in downtown Anbar, which is a gunfight every single day? There isn't rule by law to be had there because there is no security. And by the way, there's no ability for you, the government, to provide those services.
Yeah.
So we had learned a lot about it. But to your point, in Anbar, I mean, there were a lot of former Baathists. There were a lot of former military officers that I came across.
Yeah.
When we would do cordon and knocks on houses, or we would get out there and start interacting with the population, you get to talking to a guy.
Yeah.
And you sit down, you kind of figure out where he's from. Like, yeah, I was in the Republican Guard. Yeah, I was this. Yeah, I was a security officer. I was an intelligence officer. I was a fire support officer.
Yeah.
And you just met all these dudes like randomly spread out all over the countryside, like in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And here you got like this dude's like the number 2 man on whatever it is that you're talking about.
It's like look at them as like I call them the Spartans of Iraq, right? Like they are culturally not knowing to bend down to anybody.
Yeah.
Because you look historically that Ad-Dulami tribe, it goes all the way up to the borders of Syria, from Anbar province, literally from the borders of Baghdad, going towards Fallujah, going all the way down to the Syrian borders. And they have all these few sheikhs and tribal leaders that lead this tribe. And you also have on the other side of Jabouri tribe. But historically going back, that Saddam actually at a certain point had stopped people from this area to be in any sensitive positions, including the Republican Guard.
Yeah.
Because they tried to assassinate him twice. And then he put a ban saying you can still be in the military, but you're not going to be anywhere important. You're not going to be anywhere in the Republican Guard. We're not going to offer you training because you're going to turn around and use it against me. And he got to a point, actually, he threatened the Anbar province, and that many Americans don't know. Saddam made a threat to the Anbar province. Because whatever they did against the Marine Corps, they tried to do it against Saddam. They tried. They put the guns on the trucks. They loaded them. They were ready to go fight to Baghdad.
Yeah.
And Saddam said, look, I'm not even going to engage you. I'm just going to throw chemicals on top of you and be done.
Yeah.
You guys want to go? He goes, I don't mind getting rid of one tribe. It's almost like 8 million people. He's like, I'll just kill you all.
if that's the case. And then they kind of stopped. And to go through history to see that, I think the United States came in and engages this fight and treated them as a former Ba'athist.
Yeah.
The fact that not all of them were former Ba'athists, a lot of them were not even allowed to be in the government because they're known to be just people can't be trusted. And I feel culturally, they always had an enemy. Saddam was kind of like an enemy of theirs. Other people were an enemy of theirs. And then now they found the best fighting machines in the world. Yeah. It's right at the front door. And testing their skills. They went out to test their skills.
And a lot of, we spent a lot of time painfully, I'll tell you, learning the cultural differences.
Yeah.
Like obviously you're operating out there in Anbar, you're in the midst of a Sunni population, right? And in our battle space, like when we were operating outside of Fallujah back in 5, the majority of your battle space was Sunni. But the minute you start rolling down toward Nasr wa Salam and you're getting down there by the Abu Ghraib prison, Nasr wa Salam is all Shiite.
Yeah.
Right? So going back to like when I started to first get involved with, in my first tour, I was the 3 Alpha, later the HNS company commander, but throughout the entirety that I was out there, I was the primary advisor to the commander on things Iraqi because I had experience from operating with the Saudis the first go around. So I had a little bit of language. I had the culture. I understood, how Arabs work.
Yeah.
I understand that. And, the very first thing that we did, post the Fallujah battle, we had Iraqi forces with us. They disappeared. And then there was this big push to reestablish the Iraqi army, particularly in the Anbar province.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I had a very, very close friend, a guy that I worked with out there, Colonel Devise, who was the Iraqi battalion commander that I was working with. Him and his battalion, I had 2nd Muthana at this particular time. Him and his soldiers were all Shiite.
Yeah.
And here we are working with a Shiite force in a
Sunni
area. So now it's not only do we hate you because you're a foreigner, but these dudes may as well be foreigners too.
Yeah.
The way the population saw these guys was like, you're the enemy, but they're the real enemy.
It's like you taking bunch of New Yorkers to North Carolina.
Yeah, just bring them down there.
And they're not going to be welcome of them. You know what I mean? Like,
well, we got them. They're actually down in Jacksonville, North Carolina. They're all down at Camp Lejeune. That's where we all hide at, right? Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see like some of these little innocent mistakes, right? Because of the culture aspect. I mean, you mentioned advising. That wasn't even a thing. That was later on that became the NIPID and the mid teams. And they started actually making this almost like an MOS, right? Like you're coming in, you're going to be the advisor, you're going to be embedded with the Iraqi military.
It was an MOS.
It was an MOS.
I have a 4th MOS, which was foreign military advisor.
Yeah, and
at the end of my career.
And I remember like mid-team advisors, and the advisors had the most touching experience in the Iraq War.
Oh, sure.
Because you're out there in the ground, you're connected with 2 different forces, your own force, the United States military, and a foreign force, which is the Iraqi military. I mean, Anbar in 2000, I know in 2006, the 7th Iraqi Division did not exist. It was like, it was the ICDC, and then later on they regrouped it, and they said, okay, we're going to establish the 7th Iraqi Division. And then they found out the majority of the soldiers were Shia.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, we got to do something at this point. So they appointed General Mubdar Delamy to be the 7th Division commander, who was actually from the Anbar province. So that's why they started fixing things.
Yeah.
Bring in this guy who was a very good general. Saddam put in jail, tried to kill him a few times. And he was from the Anbar province.
And with Colonel Dave's battalion, 2nd Muthana, I want to say it was probably about June, maybe July of 2005. That I ended up picking that entire battalion up out of our battle space and moving them back. I actually brought them back to Camp Liberty there at BIOP at the International Airport and gave them over to 10th Mountain, and they started working the Baghdad battle space. Yeah. We ended up getting a battalion from 7th Division. I don't remember the battalion because I didn't work with them for very long. I ended up turning them over when we turned over battle space to 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines. I don't remember much about those guys because I didn't work with them much.
Do you know the biggest Iraqi division, the most casualties the Iraqi military had?
I would probably say 7th.
7th.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, working anybody that worked ANBAR, and every veteran has a different experience, but when you talk to Marine veterans in specific that spent time in ANBAR, and it doesn't matter whether it was Fallujah, Haditha, Ramadi, anywhere along the Euphrates River, working up and down that thing.
Yeah.
If you were stationed at Taqadum, if you were stationed all the way out west at El Asad or anywhere in between, everybody has a very, very different experience. Everybody has a very different flavor, if you will, of what their deployment was like. But the one commonality, as I reflect on it, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it over the years, even after I was done with my service in Iraq in 2017 for the last time, I really had time to think about it,
Yeah. And
the experience or the takeaway that I have, I should say, of the experience was really, all of this blood, sweat, and effort that we put into this. How have we made the Iraqi people's lives better? What have we done for these people? What legacy for 10 to 12 years of conflict have we left here that are going to give these people an opportunity to grow from it, outside of all the sectarian violence and all the other stuff that goes on over there.
And that's a good point. That's hard. That's a good point you brought, because as someone who's still in contact, still in touch, I think many Marines, and including yourself, or many veterans here in the United States who have served overseas, specifically in Iraq, don't see the positive outcome of their existence in Iraq. Fallujah today are a lot different than what it used to. I mean, we were talking historically, this is a culture of fighting, a culture of conflict, a culture of violence, a culture of fighting and shooting and learning how to fight. Today, Fallujah is actually a lot different than what it used to be. Today, Fallujah has the best peace activists in the country, people who actually don't want to build, don't want to fight. People who have an American touch to them, because their existence around the American soldier, around the Marine that was on the ground, had changed the mentality that the kids who were there during that time, I see them today in Iraq, are making a lot better decisions than their parents and their grandparents did. And perhaps many veterans who I have right now are finding this out through my platforms.
Right.
And it went viral, showing them that young Iraqis today in these areas actually able to stand up against Iranian influence. They are not so anti-West, anti-America. This is not a thing anymore, saying, America is the main enemy. They stopped. It is actually, Fallujah today is a lot less religious than it used to be for the last decade. And the people coming out of there, truly, I was impressed to see. It was like, oh my God, this was a 5-year-old running around looking at Marines, all this fight, not knowing 19 years later, this kid coming out to become a peace activist. This kid thought about opening a KFC in Fallujah. He thought about opening a barbecue joint in Baghdad. The things you would see would just blow your mind.
And I think another really, really important point that I want to make with you is, like, from my generation, my dad's generation is the Vietnam generation.
Yeah.
So, the connection now that exists between generations of veterans, whether you're an Iraq, Afghanistan guy, and your dad may be a Vietnam veteran, right?
Yeah.
The connection that we now have is like dudes like yourself, like the guys that came back from Vietnam, some of them would bring home war brides. Some of them would, there would be a sense of that Vietnam culture that came back with them.
True.
And here you're here with us now.
Yeah.
And I think it's good for us to know, that there's a linkage not only from the generations that came before us, veteran-wise, but it's positive for us to know that, we've changed your life. We've changed lives over there. There was a tangible outcome for all the blood, sweat, and tears. And, that it takes a little bit of reflection. It takes a little bit of thought, and it takes a little time to get there. It really does. I mean, I only retired in 2019, and this is not an epiphany that I've had in the last 4 or 5 years. This is something that I've been thinking about since, I set foot on the ground back at the end of 4, beginning of 5.
Yeah.
And it's just taken a while for that understanding to matriculate. It really has.
And I think it's extremely important for vets to know the outcome, which I put myself on a mission actually to project what's happening in Iraq. I have shown veterans the malls that have been built in Iraq. You know, when did Iraq have a mall when we were there? None. We had zero. I've never been to a mall in Iraq. Now Iraq has so many malls you can't even count. The touch of the American soldier have changed a lot of Iraq. Or perhaps Iraqis that I talked to in the daily basis overseas in Iraq, especially young ones, told me that, expressed that, right? And I don't see that here showing to the American soldier. They think, a lot of American soldiers here thinking that they were part of a false war and that a lot of civilians were killed, but that's far away from the truth, what the media is promoting, what everybody's promoting. Perhaps today's Iraqis are fighting the enemy, which is the Iranian influence that's controlling Iraq, almost like a snake wrapped up around its victim. Yep. Perhaps today's Iraqis wish the Marine in the Anbar province was still around, or the American soldier of the 1st Cav was still around in Baghdad, because it was their only assurance that this guy can't bully them, that this guy can't come in, take their money, takes their government, takes all the power, that this guy can't put them into prison. Because there's one common thing that scared the Iranian influence in Iraq. It was called the American soldier. Yeah, nobody ever was able to scare them.
And I'll tell you, you know, when I look back at it, one of the things that I'm most thankful for is the gift that I had at the time that I spent. And I learned in 2017 from talking to other Iraqis that I worked with that Colonel Dave had passed away not too long ago. You know, he was a great dude. You know, we used to sit down and just talk. You know, here I am a captain, here he's a colonel. And we would just have, this is a guy that fought against the United States during Desert Storm way back in the day in 1991. You know, obviously it resisted us on the push up. And, you know, he was a very, very honest mirror to me. Like, I would ask him questions like, you know, what did you think about how we did this or how we did that? Yeah. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to understand where he was coming from. He was a very, very genuine, very honest man. And, you know, for me, you know, I evaluate every person I meet based on their character. I mean, this dude was just straight honest with me. Yeah. And, you know, that gift of having an opportunity to work with somebody that not only wanted to make his own country better for himself and his family, but also for his country. He wanted his countrymen to be better. He wanted them to, you know, be the best that they could be, so to speak. And through me, you know, as an advisor, when I'm taking things back to my senior commanders on the U.S. side saying, hey, sir, Colonel Dave's really interested in trying to do this. How can we help him do this? You know, I felt like I was really not only doing something for his soldiers, but I was doing something for their families and I was doing something for somebody else. So it wasn't just about, you know, I'm going to come over here to Iraq and get my war on, which is this mentality that because we were only there for 7 months at a time, there was always this feeling that you were going to come in and you couldn't do the last guy's plan. You always had to do your own, right? Yeah. Because that's really helpful to everybody that we're just going to do it that way and never mind what happened before us. But, you know, when I think back on it, what I learned and how I grew as a person as a result of the experience of being an advisor and working with people to better themselves. If I took nothing else away from my life that was meaningful, it would be that, quite frankly.
I think it's kind of interesting years later to find out that the enemy, we really didn't have any idea who we were fighting against in Iraq. We thought we did. Right. Even Iraqis didn't realize who we really were fighting for. And I remember one thing, that as I was in that fight for 5 years, I went from the 2003 to 2008, the whole entire surge. I was an Iraqi soldier riding in there. And what I saw, something different, that 04 to about beginning of 05, the fight was pretty much a natural. And then everything changed within like days. Yeah. The whole fight, the casualties. Many people don't know 1,200 Marines died in the Anbar province alone. Many people died all over Iraq, Army soldiers, whatever. Sure. And the one thing that I remember is that all of a sudden I started seeing this horrific damage. And it made me think twice. And I said, you know, why did this guy who spent every single day shooting at me with a small arm fire is no longer doing that?
Right.
What changed? And why are they all doing it all over the country? It's almost like, how are they communicating? I'm fighting Shia militias in Sadr City, and I'm fighting the Sunni insurgencies on the other side, but now they're all just changed their style of fighting. Everything just changed. And then I was so confused by that, because as a native, I'm like, these guys are not supposed to communicate. They're rivals. Perhaps they're in a civil war in 2006 after the blowing up of the Golden Mosque. And back then, really, this was just a puzzle. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure out how that was working.
Yeah.
Until now, years later, we're talking about literally 18 years later, I see statements that finally showed me that there was a connection between what was happening on the ground, because many civilians here don't realize we were not fighting only Iraqis. We didn't know what we were fighting.
Oh, yeah.
Many soldiers on the ground thought, oh, we were fighting Iraqis. No, there was an update that happened in the end of 2004, going into 2005, that enhanced our enemies and encouraged them even more to fight us. And that is when the EFB bomb got introduced. Sure. And I have Doug here today that I wanted to get him into that. The EFB was clearly introduced by Iran.
Oh, sure. Definitely.
How did you see that difference when the EFB got introduced? I mean, I just remember the hospitals were overwhelmed. Everything was overwhelmed. So, how did you feel about that?
I'm going to back up on that one for a second. Yeah. And if you think about, back to your earlier comment about who you're fighting. I mean, one of the terms that we used to always hear all the time is, hey, we're dealing with a group of foreign fighters. And I had to gain clarity when I talked to Colonel Dave about this. I said, what do you think? What do you consider a foreign fighter? I mean, sure, the bounds of nationality, whether they were Syrians, Lebanese, Iranians, that's obvious.
Saudis, Yemenis.
Right, all those people coming in. He said anybody that wasn't from that neighborhood was considered a foreign fighter, And you had Chechens and you had other folks that were running around.
Uzbekistan. Anbar province was full.
Dagestanis. I mean, you had all of these people running around out there. But if you look at, I'm thinking back to like 2004, 2005, 2006, the IED went through an evolution, right? Not only the manner in which it was created, but the manner in which it was employed went through an evolution. And, we were talking before this segment, Doug and I were talking about, like to the Vietnam generation, the Huey helicopter is the epitome or the zenith or the image that you have about the Vietnam War. For our generation, it's going to be the Humvee, and the signature weapon was the IED, right?
Yeah.
So going back to 5, you would see, the surface laid 155 or 122 or 152 round that was laid on the ground with the piece of red det cord that ran out.
Yeah.
And then, later in end of 2004, you would start to see the daisy chain IED of 1, 2, 3, 4 shells put together. And then we went through this whole evolution in Anbar where we ripped up every single median that you had out there. Like if you're thinking about like Route Mobile down there in the south between Zidon and the empty area in between, we ripped out all of those medians because we were terrified of these things that people are actually taking these shells, putting them in a concrete form, and then putting them into the medians. So our engineers spent all this time ripping these things up. So, I always tell people that Iraq was like the world's largest ASP, man. Our ammunition supply point, it was all out there. Whatever you wanted, you could find. It was out there, right?
Yeah.
But there wasn't the expertise available. Where do you get this expertise from that teaches you how to build a bomb?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, out there in the world out there in the Middle East, it's not hard because you have cross-pollination of tactics, techniques, and procedures all the time. Israel is fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah in 2006.
Yeah.
Some of those people find their way into your battle space. Some of them leave your battle space and go over there and teach those folks.
Yeah.
And you've got the puppet master back in Tehran that's saying, okay, we're going to send this new weapon out there. And it's important that people understand that the way that the Iranian government, the Islamic Republic saw the United States, they never wanted to have a head-on conflict.
Yeah.
Since 79, since the revolution happened, it wasn't they did not want to have a war with the United States the way they fought against Iraq for 10 years. They didn't want to do that. But now you have an opportunity to fight this proxy war through proxy forces.
Yeah.
So it's much easier now to find people that are circulating all over the Arab world that are over here doing something against the Israelis. They're fighting against the Americans. They're fighting over here. And you can orchestrate them. And, you know, now I'm going to give you this device.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you this super powerful device that you can't find anywhere else on the battlefield. It's not like you go down to the ASP and pick one of these things up. They're not there.
They're not there, yeah.
Right? So not only am I going to give you the device, I only got to give you a 30-minute class on how to put this thing together. I probably don't even need 30 minutes to teach you.
Yeah.
And it reduces the risk. It causes a tremendous amount of casualties. And it's cheap, easy, and simple to produce and hand out. But there is no mechanism in Iraq that allowed you to produce that. It had to come from somewhere. But that is, you know, when we talk about the explosively formed penetrator or the EFV, that is the high end of the IED experience in Iraq. Did we see things like that in Anbar? I would say probably very, very limited.
Yeah.
In terms of scope and scale, most of what we saw out there was, you know, surface, subsurface laid, shells, mines, things like that. I mean, but if you were in Sadr City, you were operating down there, you were definitely going to see those things.
Yep.
Not only are you going to see them, you know, on the side of the road, but they'll dig them into a wall for you. They'll get creative.
Yeah.
And, you know, going back to what we were talking about early on in the war, you know, it was in the median. We'd put an IED in a dead animal. We would put it, you know, in a staircase. They would get creative. But now you had something that was guaranteed to be a killer. Absolutely guaranteed.
Guaranteed, yeah.
And, you know, if you take a look at our gear, our vehicles, as the years go on, you're seeing bigger and bigger and bigger, more heavily armed vehicles.
Armored. We went from non-armored to armored to up-armored.
Well, yeah, you remember in First Fallujah, we were out there, we used to call it Frankenstein armor. You'd go out there and get you a bunch of metal plate and weld it on there and throw some bomb blankets in there with some sandbags and, you know, say your Hail Mary and hope everything's going to come out all right.
Yeah.
But when, you know, as we progressed in 2005, I remember when our battalion got the very first L-shaped doors after the Fallujah battle, and then we went to these up-armored Humvees that actually had, no kidding, metal doors. And I remember like laughing to myself thinking the vehicles that we were using in 1993, like when I came in the Marine Corps, had plastic doors.
Yeah.
The vehicles that we showed up with for the Iraq war were, you know, like if you remember the old gun trucks, they had the fiberglass doors. I was like, we were going to fight the Soviet Union with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But here I am like with a real live 155 round that goes right through everything. And it was just insane to track that development of what it is that we were doing out there. And just every time we came out with a bigger vehicle, the enemy would come out with a larger device. It was just natural. To the point that it was safer to walk, man. You'd be better off.
I'll tell you, Iran was very skilled. Iran was very skilled on how to not leave any evidence on the ground. When you think about it, Iran always works through their policy. They leave their rivals and their differences behind in religion.
Oh, sure.
And they come out of the closet when it comes to foreign policy, communicating with people. I mean, look how Iran was able to host all these Taliban leaders, even though it's the rival side of their Islamic religion with them. It's a Shia and Sunni thing. But Iran learned to put their differences behind when it comes to foreign policy. And that just goes to show you how strong the Iranian foreign policy is. And they figured out a way it was easy for them to communicate with the Shia militias. That was the easiest part for them. The hardest part was how to communicate with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and Zarqawi. I mean, look, back in my day, if you have told anyone, and including, I remember even General Adriano when he told the media for the first time, no one would, if you told anybody that there is a connection between the Sunni insurgencies and Iran, everybody would laugh at you, right? They'd be like, oh, what a joke. Like, there is no connection howsoever. Now that you see statements and evidence that Zarqawi actually released an Iranian hostage himself.
Yeah.
Zarqawi showed up to the resistance in Fallujah and told them, you need to let this Iranian counselor go home. And everybody was shocked. Even the Islamic State, who were fighting under him, said, well, that's the enemy. No, he's not. Let him go.
Yeah.
And then he stated, they asked him why. So religiously, all these radicals have a religious debate. So they got into a debate with Zarqawi, say, hey, man, what are you doing? You just released an Iranian guy that we could use as a hostage. And he said, no, because we have brothers in Iran. And that statement right there, that just came out recently, changed the whole entire game. Back then, you go back to General Ariano trying to convince Laura Logan and everybody, the whole entire media about this. Everybody thought of it as a joke. Yeah. Everybody thought this was not a supportive evidence. This is nothing in the ground. But going back to how Iran did this, the militia's explosive specialists were clearly pulled out of the country. Some of them were trained in Iran. The Sunni insurgency and the Shia insurgency both fought the same style. And Iran was actually extremely careful how they did this. Iran did not send one single Iranian into Iraq to do this. They sent Ali Musa Daktuk, who is basically a third party, who's a member of Hezbollah. And he's an Arab.
Sure.
And he actually masters the Iraqi dialect. So when he entered Iraq, he was immediately issued Iraqi IDs from the Iraqi Ministry of Interior, because the Minister of Interior was Bakr Jabr Solak, who was an Iranian agent. So they issued all these IDs for him. He entered Iraq and he trained every single person, including 300 names of explosive specialists in Iraq, and changed the whole fight. And this whole entire time, nobody knew this guy was actually not an Iraqi. And you couldn't figure that through his dialect. You really listen carefully to him. Right. And one guy. But Iran was extremely careful to not leave any evidence on the ground they were behind this. And if it wasn't for Laith al-Khazali, who got arrested, who was the leader of Asab al-Haq, had started talking when he was detained, and he made that golden confession. That I see it as the only evidence out there of Iran involvement. Because truly, when you try to look for more evidence, what evidence do you have? Do you have a video or an audio or anything of Qasem Soleimani communicating? No, that guy was a ghost, came in and out, nobody knew. But that one confession, golden confession of Qais al-Khazali, while being under pressure, and I give a lot of credits to the interrogators who were actually putting the pressure on him, and said, okay, I'll make a confession. The guy next door you guys have, he's not Iraqi. And that's where the turnaround, that's where the touchdown in the U.S. intelligence that had touched in there, that when he made that confession, said the guy you guys just got, he's not Iraqi, he's a Lebanese operative. Yep. He was the training. He was the top trainer among Hezbollah who was in charge of doing this. This guy was doing this for years, and he was not supposed to be cut. But because Qais al-Khazali got weak, made that confession. And now I want to go to you, Doug, about this. How you're the lawyer in your law firm that is doing this right now. How, when you hear this, as far as the law, a lot of veterans are wondering, right? They really had no idea. They believed Iraqis were fighting. They were fighting Iraqis. It was just people didn't like them being there, and that wasn't the case. And because this is what the media promoted, this is what everybody told them back then. What do you feel about this case as far as getting American soldiers on the ground to see the truth finally?
Well, the evidence that you're talking about has been slowly amassed, but you point out there's this golden confession. This confession really, for me, was the icing of the cake. But so we've spent years sort of amassing this evidence and drawing a link back to what we now know was clear terroristic acts and leadership from Iran, from Tehran, in the form of, as Andrew was saying, being facilitators, using this as a proxy war against us. And so the evidence that we're talking about has actually been, vetted and organized and put into a trial package, and we're using it today in the DC federal court. So there is, the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act allows us to pursue Iran. Iran doesn't show up, by the way. You can imagine them coming to the courthouse in DC, how much of a fight that would really be. But we file a lawsuit. We get our complaint translated. We serve it on Iran. We go through a whole bunch of different steps. We end up serving through the Swiss embassy, but ultimately, the evidence is there. The evidence, and we, by the way, not only do we have the documented evidence and video, but we have people who are experts in the field. Andrew was in his very sort of the prelude to this, as you were asking him questions about sort of, what did you do on the ground and so forth. One of the things that Andrew doesn't describe of himself in his modesty is he's a PhD in history, and he's one of our experts. And we've got 5 or 6 of the very best experts in the world. And in any event, through our experts and through you, Hamid, I want to talk about you in a second in terms of how you came to be an integral part of this legal process. There is no question about the solid, how solid the causation is, how solid the connections are. That has been established, and recently, to your point, this is something that was not known in 05, 06, 07.
Yeah.
But so we have a legal process that is available it's a congressionally created fund available for people, for our war fighters who were on the ground, who were injured, or unfortunately for Gold Star families, for KIAs, where we can prosecute Iran and continue the fight. It's almost, this is, and hearing you all talk about the actual battle in that space during that time, it's fascinating. It's enlightening, and I think this is been a great conversation. But I want to make the point that the battle is not over; it's continuing.
Yeah.
And now we know who the enemy is, and so what I am grateful for is the courage that the clients, we already represent a lot of clients, but there are so many service members now, veterans, that don't even know about this fund.
Yeah.
They don't know there's a civil process, a legal process. And by the way, the amount of default judgments that we're getting in DC are sizable default judgments. There is a fund, and the fund is shared actually with the 9/11 victims. And so the fund is already paying out compensation. The fund is going to continue to be funded ad infinitum. And that's a whole separate conversation about the U.S. government and our executive branch and our ability to prosecute Iran in extrajudicial ways, to find tankers and to find bank accounts and wired funds that we can seize. Every time we seize an asset, that asset is accessible to one of our clients that has a default judgment against Iran. So really, it's all that. And so I'm thankful for this courage, where our clients have to rehash the pain.
Yeah.
Have to pull off that scab and relive what they don't want to necessarily relive.
Right.
And it's raw, and it's not easy. It's hard. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm so anyway, I want to just put that out there, that the fight continues, and we have the evidence. And I would talk just briefly about you, Hamidi, is, there, as we have put together, trials, one thing that we really didn't have as an expert is somebody who had your level of authority on the other side, where you were in Iraq and you were gathering intelligence and you were working with the U.S. government, and that information was went upstream.
Yeah.
And really, what I think was a game changer, as I've looked at some primary and tertiary documents.
Yeah.
And so it's just an amazing, I appreciate you letting me be here with you all. It's been fascinating.
I feel like when I first I'm like the other veterans out there. Like, I have a hard time trusting anything, being in the ground, operating against Iran. When someone called me and said, hey, there's a lawsuit against Iran, I was like, how are you going to get money out of Iran? But when it got explained to me, and I realized, oh my God, this is a real thing, that possibly we can get Iran to pay for what they did. And when you look back into the evidence, Iran absolutely had no reason to attack U.S. soldiers in Iraq. There's no excuse out there, because a lot of people try to make an excuse. Oh, the Iraqi people didn't want you there, this, and that. No, the bottom line is you did not attack Iran. You were not in Iran. You were concerned about the local town in Iraq. You were trying to make it better. Somehow the Iranians came in and tried to cause you damage and try to keep people fighting against you. And instead of having a dialogue with the locals, Iran made sure that the locals continued to fight you. Right. And there was no dialogue. There is no development. And there's no peace. So Iran not only erupted the peace, Iran also injured our soldiers in Iraq.
They did. And I wanted to, there's a little bit of a takeoff or a little bit of addition to your conversation about EFPs. And Andrew was going back through the history of the IED and talking about, double and triple stacks and so forth, and the evolution of the IED. What we have in our evidence includes Iranian facilitation that links all IED, not just the EFPs. EFPs are much more clear and sort of a clean example of a heightened level of technology that would not have had found its way into the war space, but for Iran. But we actually have, evidence and manuals and testimony, and we link it all the way back to any of the people who might be listening to this podcast who were part of what would be more of a sort of early era IED, right? Double stack, triple stack, whatever the idea. They have a claim as well because we see that facilitation in terms of the teaching, and Andrew was talking about how they did the wiring and doing the daisy chain and doing the embedding into the wall, and all of the stuff was really new in that in terms of mechanisms of what ultimately were trying to perpetrate extrajudicial killings. Yeah. They were trying to kill every single one of those attacks was with the intent to kill. And under the statute, we were talking earlier about the Foreign Sovereigns Immunity Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act that was passed through Congress. Anybody who was injured during the act of an extrajudicial killing, meaning whether somebody passed or not, during that, it was with the intent to kill. And that's the interpretation that the courts have given the statute for years. So so we're talking about people with injuries from burns to broken limbs to paralysis to TBIs, PTSD linked with TBIs.
So Doug had mentioned our Gold Star families, and one of the things that we're here in North Carolina, and we just passed a very, very significant anniversary. Particularly for the folks down there in Jacksonville who have the Beirut Memorial down there in Jacksonville, 23 October. A big day for 1st Battalion, 8th Marines when we lost the Marine barracks in Lebanon back in the 80s. One of our current clients right now, one of our Gold Star families, lost their son in Ramadi on the 23rd, 2005. And for me, why do I do this case? Why do I talk about it? Why do I participate in it? I'm not going to kid anybody. It's very, very personal for me because that rage, and I came home with a lot of pain and a lot of hurt as a result of burying. You bury your Marines. Lots of us got injured while we were out there, and it's very, very personal. Yeah. In this particular instance, for this family, the only son there in that family had 2 younger sisters. One just very recently was married, and the other one just got engaged. These are the happiest things that have happened to this family since the loss of their brother. Wow. And, when it all comes full circle, it's, that level of personal commitment that we still have as veterans with each other. As a member of the Military Order of the Purple Heart, I'm the National Chief of Staff. I work directly for the National Commander. And we talk about this all the time. It's not only what we do for our fellow veterans, but those that are left behind. In the case of J.R. Spears, I'm going to jump through a ring of fire or whatever I've got to do to help that family. And this is a way for me to continue fighting for J.R., to continue fighting for his family, his dad, and his sisters. And it just gives me a little bit of solace knowing that I'm taking away from those that took everything away from him. Exactly. Took everything away from that family. Exactly. He was the light of that family. True. And it gives a lot of opportunity for me to continue that fight. And, that for me, that level of personal involvement, it makes all the difference. It really does. It brings a lot of closure and a lot of senses that, you know, you didn't have to give it all on the battlefield. You can give more now. And this is an opportunity to make sure that people understand the truth. You know, Doug had mentioned I was a historian, but, you know, the books are not going to tell you everything about the pain. They're not going to tell you all about.
True.
And all these cases are all different. They really are. But the one constant that you have in all of these cases is either a veteran or a family that's left broken, left in a lot of pain, and is suffering, you know, not only for their own level of understanding about what it all meant, but also about what is it going to mean in the future. Now, this is an opportunity to help those people and help us not only understand what happened, but it gives us the opportunity to provide a little bit of closure that even after, you know, 3 or 4 trips out there, you just don't get. And now you've got time to think about it. You had time to reflect about what your service meant, and you do it for them. You really do.
We should never let our enemies walk away. I mean, and I look at it in a way that, look, they intend to kill somebody. That someone was not a threat to them in any way.
Nope.
They were behind that. Why should we walk away? Because there's all this movement. Oh, this war was false from the beginning. I don't care about the politics side of it. Nope. I care about that, why this person was killed that day and how has his family life changed forever.
Absolutely.
And I am going to, as a soldier, as a counterterrorism expert, I am going to hold the people that took his life accountable, no matter who they really are, because they didn't have a reason to. Because a lot of people are thinking that this guy was in Iraq and Iraqis didn't want him there and that's why he was killed. No, that's not the truth. He was in Iraq and he was trying to help the Iraqis that were living there, and Iran came in and murdered this American soldier. And you think I should walk away and not hold Iran accountable for their act? No, that's not how we were operating.
Right.
And that's not how soldiers do this. If we lost a brother, we're going to go and hold Iran accountable for what they did, because they absolutely have no reason. They had false information. Iran believed that if Iraq gets settled, that they were going to be next. And that's what they believed. They believed Bush was going to come in and he was going to go to Iran and they were going to be next. So that's exactly, if you look into the reason why Iran was attacking soldiers in Iraq, it's based on false information. It's an assumption.
Right.
They had, that maybe America's going to come to us. Well, America never went to Iran. So that assumption was wrong.
Right. And
away from the politics side of it, I feel that for me, when I first got that call, and when Colonel Hollenbeck called me, and I was kind of like, how are you going to get money out of Iran? When he explained to me the money already existed, and Iran is not taking the money back, for me, it was personal.
Yep.
For me, that I just wanted, I was kind of like, look, I fought these operatives in the ground in Iraq. I collected intelligence and I exposed them. I got some of them behind bars. But this is big. If I can get them to pay for what they did in Iraq with their own money, then I absolutely won that war. And I consider myself that I didn't win my war until I can get this case done. Because there is nothing more victorious for me than getting Iranian money out of their own pocket to pay for what they did to our soldiers in Iraq. And we were not there for the politics. We are all military people. Everybody followed orders and did their job to an extent. But that is why we did this. And we got to hold them accountable.
Absolutely. I want to talk just briefly about, so what does this mean to somebody who hasn't brought a claim yet? Like what's required of them? And really, there are different levels of participation. And I think it's important for maybe if somebody was injured, during the war on terror, who knows of this but hasn't brought a claim because they don't want to rehash that pain, and they don't want to go to trial, right? Because going to trial is an extra stress and so forth. There are different levels of participation, but all of the claimants get paid, fairly and relative to their injuries. And here's what I mean. At the highest level, we have what are called bellwether trial picks or bellwether participants, where they actually will come up to DC and they will provide testimony in person, and maybe some members of their family and some other fact witnesses will come and go through what is a full trial Iran doesn't show up, but we still have to put on all the evidence in front of a Article 3 federal judge, and then we get a judgment. Okay, that's a segment of the population that we represent that are basically representative plaintiffs. A majority of our clients actually don't have to uproot their lives and go to DC and go under and go through all those rigors and have that sort of level of stress, but rather help us amass the facts of their case, the medical records, incidents reports, and starting with their DD 214 and so forth. And it's really just amassing, because there's no question that they're injured. It's in the records. There's no question how it happened. We have those facts, right? It's all about just putting their case together, and then we file in a group. We file cases in what's called a civil proceeding or a complaint. And then we pick some from the 100 or 200 claimants to be those bellwether exemplar plaintiffs that actually go up to DC. And it's very fulfilling for some of those doing that, because they're doing it on behalf of those others that are within their complaint, if you will. They're the litigated group. But at the end of the day, there's a special master that basically apportions the billions of dollars that are in that fund relative to their injury or injuries, or their having passed away, and do an apportionment that's a fair, equitable assignment of a judgment. But it goes beyond just the injured service member or the Gold Star family. Our clients also include fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, children. All of those have salatium claims. Some people know the term loss of consortium claims, but a salatium claim is where as Andrew was talking about, the Spears family. The Spears family have a salatium claim. Not only does the estate have a claim, but they have their own individual claim for the pain and suffering that they've endured since his passing at the hands of Iran. Yeah. And it's not lost on me, how impactful pursuing this case is for the family on behalf of their son. It
changed your life, right? Like when you lose someone, it changed the whole entire life. It changed the whole entire family, their kids, their siblings, their weddings, whatever it is they're going to go through, it's never going to be the same. And people don't understand that. When you lose someone in combat, it's extremely difficult. That someone was in your life, or someone who's 19 years old of age goes to war and never comes back, and they believe it's the politician's fault, it's the politics, it's whatever. Right. No, there's a lot more to this that we could absolutely hold Iran accountable. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of veterans are having a hard time trusting the process. They feel that they're in peace. They should not really go back to this and just kind of leave it alone. No, we should absolutely hold the people that caused us damage in Iraq accountable, because it wasn't Iraqis.
Agreed.
As simple as that. It was Iranians.
Yeah. We've got, and as you're talking, I'm thinking also of my staff. Yeah. And I may have mentioned this or not, but we have a very large, so we're in Pensacola, Florida. Yeah. It's the cradle of Navy aviation. We've got the Blue Angels flying, throughout the week and so forth. And we're a very military forward city. And we are a very military forward firm. And so we've hired veterans from our local community, and they're slowly becoming the majority of our workforce. Yeah. And we're proud of that. But what I see is sort of they're coming to work, they're engaged, they're energized, because those veterans are helping our veteran claimants. Right. Yeah. And they understand, because many of them, were on the ground during the war on terror. They understand where they are today, and what struggles they have. And so, it's the impact is not only just the families or the claimants that are bringing lawsuits through our firm in DC, but there's actually this sort of interesting benefit that all of our local veteran community has in Pensacola. Yeah. And there's a lot of support.
Yeah. I mean, Doug brings up a great point. I mean, we've got guys on our team. I have a fellow Marine, so naturally I'm going to plug this week. We got the Marine Corps birthday on the 10th through Rock. Yeah. That's coming up. So, we have that commonality of being Marines on the ground in 2005. One of the guys that I work with. Another one of the fellows that I work with was an Army medic, running around Baghdad in the late 2006, 2007 timeframe. And there's a certain amount of cathartic activity there because we're all sitting around talking about this case through our own experiences, because and a lot of the dudes that we talk to, a lot of those veterans, I mean, instantaneously, when we pick up the phone and we start talking, it's like, hey, you know so-and-so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was with that dude back in 5 or 6. Hey, you know this cat? Yeah, I know that dude too. And it's not only good for the veteran that, we're helping, it's good for us too, because it brings us back in contact with guys that we haven't talked to in a while.
The guys that Andrew's talking about, he introduced them to us, and we hired them.
Nice.
And so we're hiring right now. So
yeah, I think it was passionate for me. You saw when I came to the law firm, and I saw everything we have. I went into the office, came out with a box of evidence, because it was when I first saw the case and saw everything, and I was kind of like, I'm like, how am I going to bring a foreign intelligence like Iran, who is very familiar with the area, and to try to find that little needle in the middle of the ocean? And I feel so good about all the evidence that I've collected so far. I feel so good from what I had in my hand and what's coming out in the ground now.
Right.
Because a lot of these guys we fought against, like the guys that fought against Andrew, are coming out with confessions in the Iraqi media. And that's really where was magical for me. It was the same time I was putting my evidence together against Iran and what I really knew. I mean, look, this was information started in the bottom level. As an intelligent asset, I started in the bottom level, telling the U.S. leadership in Iraq, hey, there's Iranian involvement. You have no idea the struggles I had to convince above just to get to the leadership, to convince, say, look, there is an Iranian operatives in the ground, whether you believe it or not. They're causing damage. They're collecting intelligence. They're learning everything about us through the U.S. advisors that are involved.
Yep.
Because I was in the MOD where we had U.S. advisors, and they also have people right in there. So they're looking at they're collecting intelligence off the U.S. advisors, whatever the U.S. advisors' policy is with their Iraqi counterparts. Mm-hmm. And I was just trying to connect the dots to provide that. I mean, it took me, do you know how long? It took me about 1.5 years to get the U.S. leadership to finally come out to the media and say, look, Iran is involved. Took us 1.5 years in the intelligence world to say, here's how much evidence. And you provided 1, 2, 3 evidence. No one wanted to believe you until you provided a full box of it saying, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. And then the media didn't believe it. And then the government didn't believe it. And then no one wanted to believe it. And I was amazed to see that where Colonel Andrew Del Gaudio was fighting in Iraq, and to get a statement of the guy that was fighting against him saying, I didn't know that either. So it's interesting to know that as a Marine officer and a Marine captain, Andrew Del Gaudio, and the guy who was fighting him in the ground, both had no idea
who the puppet master was.
Both had no idea who was actually putting them to fight one another. That this person now, after so many years, after 16, 17 years, coming out of the woodwork saying, I was shocked to know that Iran was involved. Yeah. I was shocked to see Zarqawi release an Iranian hostage. And it just goes to show you.
You know, I don't want to take us off on too much of a different tangent here just for a second, talking about Iran being the puppet master here.
Yeah.
They're doing that today, in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And, in terms of the providing of drones and so forth. And Andrew, maybe you could speak a little bit to that. But their shenanigans continue.
Yeah. One of the things that I did during the time that I was in the military, I was a Eurasian RAO, so I very, very closely tracked matters in Eastern Europe, and that was something that I did toward the latter end of my career as a planner in the Pentagon. And, I retired as a lieutenant colonel for clarity. But, taking a look at how operations are being run in the European theater right now and seeing the evolution of technology now, you kind of think about the EFP being this cutting edge technology back, during the war, like in 7 and 8. And now you see the same sort of environment being sent to the Ukraine and the Eastern Front out there, where the Russians are now actively using Iranian advisors with, suicide drones and some of the other stuff that's out there.
The kamikaze drone.
Right. And again, this is if you look at it through the lens of foreign policy, in this particular instance, a strategy that the Iranians are continuing to use of proxy, clearly we're using the Ukrainians as a test bed to figure out whether or not these things work, and they're doing a lot of the same things out there. I mean, it's interesting on many, many different levels that, the Russian procurement mechanism out there for logistical capability, is not looking into the interior of the Ural Mountains in Russia to bring this stuff forward. They're going for the off-the-shelf stuff that's out there in the international market right now. And, Iran has a capability that, hey, I don't mind lending you this. Go ahead and try it out. Let me know if it works, because God knows I can always bring it back down here and use it the same way. And, Russia, for many years now, I mean, my very last tour in 2017-18, when we were out there doing OIR, you had Russian mercenaries and Russian forces operating in Syria.
Yep.
Right? So what was your purpose in operating there? You were out there to gain experience. You were out there to gain TTPs. And one of the reflections that I had looking back at it was, who were you sending down from the Western Military District? Your senior Russian commanders that were going down there to learn how to do expeditionary warfare in Syria. Okay, yeah, sure, it's sand, not snow or not dirt or not whatever, but still learning how to project combat power at distance and learning how to, in this case, the Russians never really learned the logistical support required to support an army in the field. That's evident.
Yeah.
That's evident.
Evident right there, yeah.
But, if we were to dial that back and take a look at it through the lens of what was being observed in 17 or 18, you could probably find the same sorts of failures there. And again, it totally makes sense. I mean, go ahead, reach out to the Iranians, reach out to the North Koreans, reach out to whoever's going to give you stuff so that you can try it out here. It doesn't cost Iran, North Korea, or anybody else anything to give you something for you to try.
I mean, as a Marine historian, do you see how this, isn't this interesting to you as how Iran is now becoming the expert on proxy war? And how that they are given, who would have thought Iran will be giving weapons to Russia, who is the mother of all weapons, that sold weapons all over the world, now taking it from Iran. It just isn't that interesting connection, how Iran expertise.
Right. Yeah. So let's go all the way back, turn back the hands of time to ancient Greece. Who was the main threat of, the world's first democracy? It was the Persians.
Yeah.
Right. So what did the Persians learn as a result of fighting the Greeks? The way that you divide the city-states, you don't want the city-states to come together and fight you as a whole, right? Because that makes it a lot more difficult. So let's divide. Let's use deception. Let's use cunning. Let's use other things to divide the city-states.
Yeah.
Right? And then we just swallow them one at a time on the periphery. It's always easier to do something against a piece than it is to do it against a whole. And that's a historical lesson that if you go back and you trace it all the way forward to, all the way up until the time the Shah fell, going back to 78, 79, when the Islamic Revolution comes forward, what was the real impetus? I mean, why did we start Central Command in the first place? It was because we were afraid that the Soviet Union was going to run through the oil fields and take everything. That was really the reason. But since 1979, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been the threat in that part of the world, and we know that. That's always been the threat. And a lot of people have convoluted it. The media has gotten it wrong over the years about, where these terrorists were coming from, whether they're Sunni, whether they're Shia.
Interesting.
And this is just a perspective that I gained from being an advisor going all the way back to 2000 before the war started. When I was talking to the Saudis about how they felt about their neighbors and what they thought about Saddam. What do you think about this guy? What do you think about that?
True.
And gaining that understanding of the culture and understanding the Arabs early on before the war started helped me understand one thing, that your average Arab, your average Iraqi is not the enemy of, he's not the enemy that people would have you make him out to be. You know, sure, you see the sensationalized things about, you know, folks cutting people's heads off and all this other stuff that was going on over there. But that really was not the enemy that even the Iraqis look at that dude and say, that dude is way out there, man.
Yeah.
That dude is so far off the extreme level that, you know, it's way out there, right? But the true enemy throughout history has been those that have operated in the shadow, because that was always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. And I love how you historically connected the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Like Iran may have changed religiously. It may have changed.
Psychology never changed.
Psychology never changed. The Iranian goal is still the same. The Persian goal is still the same. Establishing a Persian empire from the sea to the river. Still the same thing. Religious-wise, a change, but Persian-wise is still the same goal. Iran wants that control because that's always been the goal of the Persian Empire.
Yeah,
to control.
And I think it's important to also say this. You know, very, very recently, I was operating down in South Florida, and I've been, you know, around, so to speak, and I'm starting to see the effects of the Iranian protests, even in our own streets. You see them out there now where people have finally gotten to the point where they're like, look, the Iranian people have suffered long enough because of the things that this government has done.
Yeah.
And it's obvious. I mean, it's clear that the changes of, you know, of time and the winds of change, if you will, are coming.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't matter, any tyrannical government that is oppressing its population, suppressing, you know, the facts about what it is that they do, they all have a reckoning. They all have a time. And I think that, you know, the next couple of years, I think, are going to be very, very interesting in that part of the world. I think that after the last 20 years and what that population, you know, I know a lot of Iranians that came to the United States when the Shah was deposed in 1978, 79. I know a lot of people that had come over before that, and they're just very warm, very loving, great people. They really are.
Yeah.
And I know that they've got plenty of family that has been left over there that's just been absolutely suppressed for the last 30, 40 years, that given the opportunity for that culture and that society to evolve, man, I can't wait to see what they could become without that influence.
I'm glad you mentioned all these facts, because not only as a military advisor, as a historian, going back to this, because history really determined all the results you're looking for. Yeah. When it comes to combat and understanding foreign intelligence entity. And Iran, in my opinion, has the smartest psychological warfare skills I have ever seen in the area.
Oh, sure.
I've seen the Mossad operates in the area. I've seen everybody. Iran just goes to show you the strength of their psychological warfare. That Iran is involved how to put a protest away in Iraq. Look at Iraq in 2019. We had millions of Iraqis blow up in the face of Iran. Oh. They know what to do. That's why Soleimani actually was airstriked in Iraq, because he came in to figure that out, and he ended up getting airstriked. And it just goes to show you how they operate, that they would not respond with force. They will let things go, and then they will pick up the leaderships of these protests, and they immediately eliminate the protests, and the protest is fading out and gone. Now this is happening on their own soil in Iran by students, that they are dealing with it with a very different way. Like if you would think Saddam, how would he respond to this? He would absolutely kill everyone right away.
Sure.
Iran today, the Ayatollah, is killing the students and meeting with their families the next day.
Sure.
Patting on their shoulder. It just goes to blow your mind to see how this government operates, that they have such a smart ways and patience with things, that you see the difference between Arabs and Persians, that when
totally different.
When Arabs respond, they'll respond with force back. You push at them, they'll push back. That the Iranian government, and specifically in the Iranian psychological units, all the Iranian PSYP studies the hell out of things before they make their steps. It's almost like a chess game.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to point out, to your point, is you remember a couple of years ago, the Iranians did some ballistic missile strikes against U.S. forces that were operating in Iraq. And people immediately took the wrong thing away from that, in my opinion, where they were like, oh, look at Iran, they're trying to bow up, they're trying to do this. Actually, they're not. I think they were doing that to prove to themselves that they could actually do that. They were trying to demonstrate that, we're a peer competitor the same way that anybody else is that has that capabilities.
Yeah.
But we're like for us, we're like, okay, yeah, great, you did that, but we know that that's not your strong suit. That's not really what you're good at.
Yeah, and I got intelligence on specifically that attack. It's called Ain al-Asad is the base. They got it.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And it's a very, actually, when you look into the intelligence so I was in a show talking about that the day off when the rockets fell down and being hit by Katyusha rockets in Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of knew the damage. I knew everything. So I actually immediately made a phone call to a combat photographer who worked for me as an intelligence source in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I need an immediate pictures of the missiles that hit the base. He was like, oh, it's impossible for me to get there. I said, well, you're the media. I need you to get me something within 24 hours. So he came back to me like 15 hours later. It was like 11 o'clock at night here. It was 8 hours different.
Sure.
Comes back. He goes, all right, I got you a picture. He says, but you're not going to believe what you're going to see. I said, why? And he said, these rockets are empty. I said, what do you mean it's empty? He said, they're empty. Look at the body. So it kind of was like confusing. Nobody in the world, not CNN, not the media, nobody at the time is operating. The only thing you see is an attack against the United States in a U.S. base in Iraq. So for me as an intelligence operative,
that was the value of the attack. It wasn't a missile. That was the value.
It's sort of the images we're seeing right now from the Ukrainian conflict, where we're seeing Russian missiles that are not detonating. We see all these remnants of unexploded munitions.
Yeah, but you see that the point is you would ask yourself, why would Iran attack Ain al-Asad base with empty rockets? That's a question you have to ask yourself. Is like, the rocket wasn't really full with explosive. It wasn't as damageable, but why did they want to do this? So I went to my Iranian sources. And my Iranian sources actually answered the question. In Iran, when they conducted this attack, the Iranians alerted the Iraqi forces, saying, we're going to attack in 30 minutes. Knowing the Iraqi forces would go till the American military, because they wanted to make sure there's no American casualties. They wanted to make sure every American soldier would go to the bunker before these rockets in the ground, just in case, even though they're not so powerful, but just in case in the landing of these rockets, no one gets killed, so there's no wars, that back then that the President of the United States won't wage a war against them. That's the first step. The second step, after they conducted the attack, they went out to the public in Iran and said, we killed 240 American soldiers on this attack. The only point of the attack was not to get revenge of the killing of Qasem Soleimani. It was for them to convince the Iranian people that we actually responded and we got our vengeance. Yep. We killed 240 Americans. And perhaps I still have evidence to this day, screenshots of the Iranian media and the release of the Ministry of Intelligence in Iran.
Shocking.
Telling the people of Iran, we killed 240 American soldiers.
Andrew and I would love to see that evidence.
Oh, I got it. I'd love to show it to you.
So,
and I know
there were a couple people that got injured as a result. Yeah. I mean, we did hand out some hearts, for what happened, but it was not. It's like I said, man. I really do, my heart, believe that they did that to demonstrate that they could do it, not because they thought they were going to inflict casualties.
Let me ask a question of Andrew, if I may. I don't want to be the host here.
Absolutely,
I know that you had some concern about how we withdrew from the Middle East, and that would be a vacuum for Russia to come in.
Sure.
Based on their ineptitude in Ukraine, does that change your sort of viewpoint or your concern about the fact that they could even take advantage of that vacuum, or have things changed since last year when we talked about this?
since the 24th of February of this year, when the Ukraine was invaded, I would tell you my personal opinion or my observation, my analysis of what I've seen. Really, not only the lack of training on the part of the leadership at the tactical level in the Russian army, just tremendously not up to task. I mean, really, most decisions that affect tactical level maneuver of troops really happen at the major level. Captains and lieutenants are doing what they're told, and they don't have non-commissioned officers. They just don't have professional non-commissioned officers the way that we do that make things happen. And the Achilles heel of every army, and it doesn't matter which one you're talking about, is the ability to project logistical capability. And I think that, Russia has they're nuclear capable. I mean, that in of itself puts you at another level. But the fact that your conventional forces are unable to effectively operate with their special operations forces that are operating on the ground, the inability to logistically sustain a force that's in the attack. I mean, from 24 February until the beginning of April, they were trying to run down Kiev. They were doing everything that they could to come through the Chernobyl area and come to the south. And, everybody remembers from the Western media reports, they show the line convoy of vehicles that are just stopped out in the middle of the field. And, here, if you really sit down and you looked at the fact that it was cold at that time of the year, there was snow on the ground, you have the ability to do cross-country maneuver, but yet you still have an army that's road-bound because they can't supply themselves. That's got to tell you something. If you are looking at that as an analyst and you're looking at what they're unable to do. Now, some of the traditional methodologies for how Russia wages war, me personally, I'm a study of the Second World War and the German Soviet War from 41 to 45. The traditional methodologies of Russians putting artillery hub to hub and just saturating an area with artillery fire, they still do that pretty well. They can figure that out. They'll bring a train load of munitions up, dump them off, and we're going to expend all remaining on that grid till it goes away. They still do that well. But really, I think what shocked most in the West is, the Russians have a tremendously capable air arm that not only could they not get air superiority, but you should have air supremacy. Like, there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that that country that's nuclear capable is capable of doing that. Does that change? Do I think that Russia is still a threat? Absolutely. Because when something is desperate, it does desperate things. And I don't think that you could ever take that off the table. I mean, anybody that that thinks that Russia is done, does Putin eventually get thrown out of power? I mean, yeah, the guy's 70. Eventually he's going to die, right? Somebody's going to have to take over. And I really honestly believe in my heart that, the same thing that we were talking about with the Iranian people. The Russian people have a very, very high tolerance historically for pain, whether inflicted by others or inflicted by their own government. And they are just very, I've known many over the years. They're very, very good people. I've known a lot of Ukrainians over the years, very, very good people. But when push comes to shove, you've got people in your country that you don't want there. They don't belong there. I'm very proud of what the Ukrainians have done out there. I think that they've done historically what they have always done. They have a tradition of resistance, and I know plenty of Ukrainians to know that they're going to continue to resist to the last. And I mean, that's what being a true patriot of your country is about. You hear them, Slava Ukraine. I mean, they're serious about it. I mean, that's what you would expect if somebody invaded your country. That's exactly what you would expect. What you're going to do, yeah. Yeah. And I've got nothing but mad respect for those guys for what they're doing out there. I really do. They are doing doing tremendous work.
My really first interview in the podcast, my first episode, was the Ukrainian Secretary of Economy, Polo Chukta. Baba Chukta. He is actually, just to see like how the camaraderie they have, a couple of them are American citizens. They lived in Ohio.
Yeah.
They didn't have to be that in that war, but everything behind went to Ukraine, put on a uniform.
Yeah.
Front line.
from the president on down, you've got a guy like Vladimir Zelensky, who you know, a lot of people bagged on him before the war for being an actor and you know, all this other stuff in that part of the world. But here's a guy that hasn't put a suit on since February 24th, who's wearing a T-shirt, who's out there on the front lines with his guys, you know, being vulnerable the same way that everybody is in combat, but he's out there leading his people. And I mean, mad respect for that guy, man. I mean, that, to come out like that and
I want to give a shout out to the Polish government. So, you know, if anybody knows about the Polish history, they have been tread upon. They've had their country taken and given back and taken again and shrunken and so forth. There is some not so good history between Ukraine and Poland.
Sure. Poland,
absolutely. And so, but they have a common enemy, which is Russia, right?
Russia,
but there were no qualms. You know, my wife is first generation Polish. All of her family is still back there. We recently went with our boys, and they were able to kick a soccer ball with the Ukrainian boy. And I wanted my boys to see what was going on there, so as a touch point for them in their future, just for context. But what we see is millions of Ukrainians leaving and coming into Poland creating an apparatus and architecture to be there. When we were there, it wasn't like Ukrainians were walking the streets. They were very well, it was managed well, and by other European EU countries as well, by the way. But I just have a shout out to the Polish government and the Poles for stepping up and not complaining and being receptive. And I think in some respects, a lot of that has to do with Poland's incorporation in the EU.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I fully concur. I mean, Poland has become a tremendous ally to NATO. I mean, the military capabilities that they've developed in the last 10 to 15 years and the ability to mass produce weaponry, they've become a tremendous asset. I mean, something very impactful that I saw many years ago when I was going through my SAW class, School of Advanced Warfighting with the Marine Corps, an advanced graduate level school. We had an opportunity to stop at Monte Cassino, and the Polish cemetery there at Monte Cassino. Obviously, the Poles did not have control of their own country at this time. The Nazis and the Russians at this point are running back and forth over it. But there's a cemetery there at Cassino in Italy that is stepped up onto the hillside, and at the top of the hillside in Polish, it reads basically that these men had fought and died for this country while their own country was occupied. I mean, that is a tremendous statement. And I know, and I had a young man that served with me when I was a lieutenant colonel as a captain. This young man was of Polish descent, and his grandfather had fought in World War II with the Allies, had fought in Italy. And just tremendously proud people. I mean, absolutely tremendously proud, tremendously nationalist, just very, I guess the best way to say it is they are really the most freedom-loving people that you've got out there. I mean, they just get on board with that.
Poland came really far away.
Yeah.
And I see that the damage Russia has taken in the Ukraine right now. I can't imagine if they attacked Poland, how bad that would be, right? Knowing that how meathead the Polish are and how resistant they are, I'm like, that would be worse for you.
All of those countries, to include the Ukraine, all of them have a tremendous history with the Russian Empire, whether it's the Soviet Empire or before that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love to tell people as a historian is, the Russians have a tremendous history of rewriting the history in such a way that's beneficial. And, people that have sat down and read like their version of the Great Patriotic War or World War II is what we call it here in the West. When you sit down and you take a look at how the facts are manipulated in such a way that benefit the regime, I mean, that is still very alive and well. I mean, the Russians are right now in the process of rewriting the history of the Second World War yet again, because they're, having Stalin involved really wasn't something that they wanted to continue to talk about. And they have struggles with their own identity and their history.
Would you say, Hamady, that Iran has the same, they have the same revisionist history, rewriting of history, or doing things in the moment? You were just talking earlier about the missile strike.
Yeah.
And then that's just a narrative.
Yeah.
It's false narrative.
Yeah, it is, and it's like the deception, and it just goes to show you how history, like, right, you're dealing with the Russian Empire, Iran now is the representative of the Persian Empire, and their control in the Middle East would never be stopped. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
That this government of Iran, if it doesn't go away anytime soon, if the students of Iran doesn't stop them at their track, anything is possible, by the way. I mean, the same way Khamenei came to power in 1979 through students, now are the students of Iran standing against them, against the ideology. It's a very brutal regime, but it's extremely smart. Force is probably the last thing they would use when it's in their own soil. They're taking a step back and they're very careful, watching everything and trying to find the right way of dealing with this. Perhaps they've already been announcing that, the West and the United States and Israel is behind all these protests, not the fact that they're just killing innocent people and people had enough. Historically, I feel Iran is going to be causing a lot of damage in the Middle East, as it has been causing damage since our days. Now, the only difference is that Iran is not so secretive about it as they were back in our days when we were fighting them. Yeah. Now it's clear they're giving all these kamikaze drones to Russia. Who would have thought? I never thought ever I would see a day where Russia will be taking weapons from Iran. Because historically, Iran would buy from Russia. Yep. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, the 21st century is a kind of weird space, but if you think back historically to the Middle Ages, you think back to the Crusades, you think back all the way back, that influence, what you see in the Ukraine in that proxy war, you also see as, if I have the ability to spread my influence and demonstrate to people that I'm more to be reckoned with, I am providing the Russians with weapons, to increase, kind of like back to the missile strike, where I'm going to increase the image of the regime and of the state. But I don't really see it for anything more than what it is, which is, the use of tactical items that the Russians just simply don't have, and I can get them off the shelf from you. So I'm going to take them and I'm going to use them.
Back to the of Iran, how do we feel? How do we feel that so far, with all the evidence we have collected against Iran, altogether, the team, myself, Colonel Gaudio, and everybody else, how do we feel so far we're doing with the case?
We're locked and loaded. We have the vehicle. It's already, so that level of evidence we have is now reaching a in the law, we call it sort of a level of proof, or, sort of what's the level of evidence that you need in a particular case. It is becoming almost clear and convincing, which is not the standard in this case.
Yeah.
We have if Iran were to come with lawyers to court and try to defend themselves, they would be crushed by the weight of the evidence. And as you pointed out earlier, a lot of this is coming to light recently through a lot of testimonials and a lot of statements and declarations that, frankly, is just extra supportive of our case. I think we had enough, but where there's any doubt, that doubt is now gone in terms of that we have all of the pieces and that we have all of the association and all of the causality all connected. Right now, we just need to get the word out that there is a congressionally available fund of money. We have the evidence linking the Islamic Republic of Iran to the terroristic acts that resulted in injuries and the death of our soldiers and Marines and all the branches, service members. And so now it's just getting the word out, really.
Yeah.
And it's what's shocking to me, and Andrew may have some recent experience with talking to Marines about this, is for every person I talk to who was in Iraq or Afghanistan during the war on terror that's injured, 3 or 4 knows about this case, 3 or 4 don't. Meaning a very small percentage of those that were injured know anything about this congressionally funded process. And it's just mind-boggling to me that, so we come from a long history of litigation. Our firm's been around for, 23 or 4 years, and we cut our teeth on pharmaceutical medical device litigation, suing, Johnson & Johnson's, Merck's, Pfizer's of the world. And so when we get into a case, we're all in. We have to be all in because we're going up against, it's David versus Goliath always. And so when we got into the anti-terrorism litigation under FSIA, we knew we needed to build that level of evidence that would be on par with what we're used to doing, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And we're not going to go to the courthouse with an empty briefcase. And the judge is not going to have that. And so as we dug into the case, collected evidence, amassed the best experts in the world, and have developed the legal causation, again, it is now insurmountable. So it's a not only winnable case, it is a case that is almost won by default because they won't show up to the courthouse to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And now it's about just kind of getting the word out and making sure that people have an available remedy for their injuries. That frankly, talking about our country versus whether we're talking about Russia or Iran or all these Iraq, we have an incredible civil justice system here.
Yeah.
That is unparalleled in the world in being able to find ways to compensate people who are injured by, whether it be negligent act or grossly negligent, or in this instance a terroristic act. So I'm proud of what we're doing, but I'm surprised on how little is known out there in the community. And this is, and Hamidi, I hope people are listening, and I hope that they are asking questions about, can I get involved? And if you have an injury from that space, Iraq or Afghanistan, you can bring a claim, and the claims are large value claims. There is this fund has already paid over $3 billion historically. So, and it will continue to be funded, as I said earlier, in perpetuities. It is incumbent on us to seize more oil tankers and find more bank accounts, and we've been very good at that. And frankly, it's a global economy. Iran cannot be insular. They must do work. They must do business with. Yeah. They're going to be sending wires, and we're going to be catching them sending wires. Yeah. And so as we catch them sending wires or doing things and being able to seize property, that then is an available asset that should rightfully be paid to our service members, our veterans. And that's what we're all about. We're all in on this case. And I'm thankful for you having us on this podcast to talk about it.
I think it's a great awareness for the vets out there that have no idea who they were fighting against. And finally, we are connecting the dots with the team of counterterrorism experts, historians, military advisors. We have 2 special forces doctors, flight surgeons, everything. We are connecting these dots. We are coming with final evidence. And it is time for these vets to join the fight because we need to do that, SSP.
I will say one thing, just thinking about the evidence and what you've been able to uncover recently. To the extent there has been any doubt, that doubt has now been erased.
Dude.
I'm glad.
Yeah, and thank you.
I'm glad. And I as I said, it's personal for me. I'm sure it's personal for Lieutenant Colonel Gaudio as well. It's personal for me because these vets have suffered. We know the damage that continue with these families. And this is very important for us to hold Iran accountable, get him to pay. There is no such a thing in our culture called walk away or just delete that. Yeah, I could delete that part of my life, but now I'm not going to do that now until I hold them accountable, get them to pay. And there's possibility Iran might show up to court. There's possibility that could happen.
Bring it on.
However, we are ready, whether they show up or not, whether Iran can come forward or not. There are money. Iran cannot conduct business. We are going to be out there watching everything, and we're going to give them to pay for it one way or another, whether one fund's going to run out, whether it's not. Iran, we're going to hold them accountable until we get every single claim, every single soldier taken care of for what they did in Iraq.
Indeed.